Chapter 2, Section 1 of Cup of Gold. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Read by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona. Cup of Gold by John Steinbeck. For more than a century, Britain had watched with impatience while Spain and Portugal, with the permission of the Pope, divided the New World and patrolled their property to keep out interlopers. It was a bitter thing to England, there imprisoned by the sea. But finally Drake had burst the barrier and sailed the forbidden oceans in his little golden hind. The great red ships of Spain considered Drake only a tiny stinging fly, an annoying thing to be killed for its buzzing. But when the fly had gutted their floating castles, burned a town or two, and even set a trap for the sacred treasure train across the isthmus, they were forced to alter their conception. The fly was a hornet, a scorpion, a viper, a dragon. They named him El Drake, and a fear of the English grew up in the New World. When the Armada fell before the English and the angry sea, Spain was terrified at this new force, which emanated from such a very little island. It was sad to think of these bright carven ships lying on the bottom or torn to fragments on the Irish coast. And Britain thrust her hand into the Caribbean. A few islands came under her power: Jamaica, Barbados. Now the products of the home island could be sold in colonies. It added prestige to a little country to have colonies, provided they were strongly populated, and England began to populate her new possessions. Younger sons, spendthrifts, ruined gentlemen sailed out for the Indies. It was a fine way to be rid of a dangerous man. The king had only to grant him land in the Indies, and then express the desire that he live on his property and cultivate the rich soil there for the good of the English crown. The outsailing ships were crowded with colonists, gamblers, touts, pimps, dissenters, papists, all to own the land and none to work it. The slave ships of Portugal and the Netherlands could not move black flesh from Africa fast enough to supply the increasing demands of those who clamored for workers. Then felons were gathered out of the prisons, and vagrants from the streets of London, beggars who stood all day before the church doors, those suspected of witchcraft or treason or leprosy or papism, and all these were sent to work the plantations under orders of indenture. It was a brilliant plan. The labor needed was supplied, and the crown actually received money for the worthless bodies of those it once fed and clothed and hanged. More could be made of this. Whole sheaves of orders of indenture, ready sealed by the government with blank spaces for names, were sold to certain captains of ships. They were given instructions to act with extreme discretion about the names they filled in. And rows of coffee and oranges and cane and cocoa grew and ever spread out on the islands. There was some little trouble, of course, when the terms of indenture ran out, but the slums of London bred new slaves quickly enough, God knew, and the king was never without a fine supply of enemies. England was becoming a sea power, with her governors and palaces and clerks in the New World, and ships of manufactured things were sailing out of Liverpool and Bristol in ever-increasing numbers. 1. With breaking day, Henry was in the outskirts of Cardiff, all his terror gone, and a new blossoming wonder in him. For it was an unbelievable thing, the city of houses, rank on rank, no two of them exactly alike, the lines of them stretching out endlessly like an army in the mud. He had never considered such magnitude when people spoke of cities. The shops were opening their shutters, putting their goods on display, and Henry stared wide-eyed into every one as he passed. Down a long street he went until he came at last to the docks with their fields of masts like growing wheat and their clouds and cobwebs of brown rigging in an apparent frenzy of disorder. There was loading of bundles and barrels and slaughtered animals into some of the ships, and others were sending out of their curved bellies goods in queer foreign boxes and sacks of braided straw. A tremendous bustle of excitement lived about the docks. The boy felt that holiday tingle which had come to him when men were putting up pavilions for a fair at home. A loud song burst out of a ship just getting under way, and the words were clear, beautiful foreign words. The water slapping smooth hulls was a joy to him to the point of pain. He felt that he had come home again to a known, loved place after days and nights of mad delirium. Now a great song of many voices came from the moving bark, and its brown anchor rose from the water. Its sails dropped from the yards and caught the morning wind. The bark slid from its berth and moved softly down the channel. Onward he walked to where the ships were careened, showing weeds and barnacles gathered in many oceans hanging to their shining sides. Here was the short, quick hammering of the caulkers and the rasp of iron on wood, and brusque commands built up to roars by the speaking trumpets. When the sun was well up, Henry began to feel hungry. He wandered slowly back to the town to find his breakfast, reluctant to leave the docks even for food. Now the crimps were coming out of their holes, and the sniffling gamblers who preyed on sailors. Here and there a disheveled, sleepy-eyed woman scurried homeward as though fearing to be caught by the sun. Seamen on shore leave rubbed their puffed eyes and looked into the sky for weather signs as they lounged against the walls. Henry wondered what these men had seen in the sailing days of their lives. He stepped aside for a line of carts and tumbrils loaded with boxes and bales for the ships, and immediately had to dodge another line coming away loaded with goods from across the sea. He came at last to a busy inn. The Three Dogs, it was called, and there they were on the sign, looking very like three startled dromedaries. Henry entered and found a large apartment crowded with people. Of a fat man in an apron, he asked whether he could get breakfast. "Have you money?" the host asked suspiciously. Henry let the light fall on a gold piece in his hand, and, as he had made the sign of power, the apron was bowing and gently pulling him by the arm. Henry ordered his breakfast and stood looking around the inn. There were a great many people in the room, sitting at the long tables, or leaning against the walls. Some even were seated on the floor. A little serving girl went among them with a tray of liquors. Some were Italians from the ships of Genoa and Venice, come with rare woods and spices that had been carried overland on camelback from the Indian Ocean to Byzantium. Frenchmen were there from the wine boats of Bordeaux and Calais, with an occasional square-faced, blue-eyed Basque among them. Swedes and Danes and Finns were in from the whalers of the North Ocean, dirty men who smelled of decaying blubber. And at some of the tables were cruel Dutchmen who made a business of carrying black slaves from Guinea to Brazil. Scattered among these foreign men were a few Cambrian farmers, looking frightened and self-conscious and alone. They had brought pigs and sheep from the country for victualling the ships, and now were bolting their food so that they might get home again before nightfall. These looked for security to 3 man-o'-war men wearing the king's uniform, who talked together by the door. Young Henry lost himself in the lovely clamor of the room. He was hearing new speech and seeing new sights. the earrings of the Genoese, the short knife-like swords of the Dutch, the colors of faces from beef red to wind-bitten brown. All day he might have stood there with no knowledge in him of the passing of time. A big hand took his elbow, a hand gloved in calluses, and Henry looked down into the broad, guileless face of an Irish seaman. "Will you be sitting here, young man, alongside of an honest sailor out of Cork named Tim?" As he spoke, he squeezed violently against his neighbor, flinging him sideways and leaving a narrow space on the bench end for the boy. There are no men like the Irish for being brutally gentle. And Henry, as he took the seat, did not know that the sailor out of Cork had seen his gold piece. "Thank you," he said. "And where is it that you go sailing?" "Ah, any place that ships go I do be sailing," replied Tim. "I'm an honest sailor out of Cork, with no fault on me save never having the shine of a coin to my pocket. And I wonder now how I'm to be paying for the fine breakfast, and me with never a shine," he said slowly and emphatically. "Why, if you have no money, I'll buy your breakfast, so you will be telling me of the sea and ships." "I knew it was a gentleman you were," Tim cried. "I knew it the minute my eyes landed on you, soft-like. And a small drink to be starting with?" He shouted for his drink without waiting for Henry's consent, and when it came, raised the brown liquor to his eyes. "Whiskabaw," the Irish call it. That means water of life, and the English call it whiskey, only water. "Why, if water had the fine body and honest glow of this, its sailing I would give up and take to swimming," he laughed uproariously and tipped the glass up. "I'm going to the Indies," Henry observed, with thought to bring him back to talking of the sea. "The Indies? Why, so am I, tomorrow in the morning, out for Barbados with knives and sickles and dress goods for the plantations. It's a good ship, a Bristol ship, but the master's a hard man, all stiff with religion out of the colony at Plymouth. Hellfire, he roars at you and calls it prayer and repentance, but I'm thinking there's joy in all the burning to him. We'll all burn a good time if he has his way. I do not understand the religion of him. There's never an Ave Mary about it, and so how can it be religion at all? Do you think perhaps I could go in your ship with you?" Henry asked chokingly. The lids drew down over the ingenuous eyes of Tim. "If it was £10 you had," he said slowly, and then seeing the sorrow on the boy's face. "5, I mean." "I have something over 4 now," Henry broke in with sadness. "Well, and 4 might do it too. You give me your £4 and I'll be talking with the master. It's not a bad man when you get to be knowing him, only queer and religious. No, don't be looking at me like that. You come along with me. I wouldn't run off with the £4 of a boy that bought my breakfast at all." His face bloomed with a great smile. "Come," he said, "let's be drinking that you go with us on the Bristol Girl. Whiskabaw for me and wine of Oporto for you." Then breakfast arrived and they fell to eating. After a few mouthfuls, Henry said, "My name is Henry Morgan. What is your other name besides Tim?" And the sailor laughed heartily. "Why, if there was ever a name to me but Tim, you might find it kicking around in a wheel rut at Cork. The father and mother of me did not wait to be telling me my name, but Tim was on me without giving. Tim is a kind of free name that you can just take and no one to mention it, like the little papers the dissenters be leaving in the streets, and they scuttling off, not to be seen with them. You can breathe Tim like the air, and no one to put hand on you." Breakfast over, they went into the street, busy with the trade of carters and orange boys and peddling old women. The town was crying its 1,000 wares, and it seemed that delicate things from the far, unearthly corners of the world had been brought by the ships, and dumped like clods on the dusty counters of Cardiff. Lemons, cases of coffee and tea and cocoa, bright Eastern rugs, and the weird medicines of India to make you see things that are not, and to feel pleasures that fly away again. Standing in the streets were barrels and earthen jugs of wine from the banks of the Loire and the Peruvian slopes. They came again to the docks and the beautiful ships, the smell of tar and sunburned hemp, and the sweetness of the sea breathed into them from off the water. At last, far down the row, Henry saw a great black ship, and Bristol girl painted in letters of gold on her prow. And the town and all the flat hulks became ugly and squalid beside this beauty of the sea. The curved, running lines of her and the sensuous sureness of her were tonic things to make you gasp in your breath with pleasure. New white sails clung to her yards like long, slender cocoons of silkworms, and there was fresh yellow paint on her decks. She lay there, lifting slightly on a slow swell, champing, impatient to be flying off to any land of your imagination. A black Sheban queen she was, among the dull brown boats of the harbor. "Oh, it's a grand ship, a fine ship," cried Henry, wonderstruck. Tim was proud. "But only come aboard of her and see the fittings, all new. I'll be talking with the master about you." Henry stood in the waist while the big seaman walked aft and pulled his cap before a lean skeleton of a man in a worn uniform. "I have a boy," he said, though Henry could not hear. "A boy that's set his heart in the Indies, and I'm thinking you might be liking to take him, sir." The hungry master scowled at him. "Is he a strong boy who might be some good in the islands, bo'sun? So many of them die within the month, and there you have trouble the next trip. He is there behind me, sir. You can see him yourself standing there, and very well made and close-knit he is, too." The hungry master appraised Henry, running his eyes from the sturdy legs to the full chest. His approval grew. "He is a strong boy, all right, and good work for you, Tim. You shall have drink money of it and a little extra ration of rum at sea. But does he know anything about the arrangement?" "Never a bit." "Well, then, don't tell him, but put him to working in the galley. He'll think he's working out his passage. No use of caterwauling and disturbing the men off watch. Let him find out when he gets there." The master smiled and paced away from Tim. "You can be going with us in the ship," the sailor cried, and Henry could not move for his pleasure. "But," Tim continued seriously, "the £4 is not enough for passage. You'll be working a bit in the galley, and we sailing." "Anything," Henry said, "anything I'll do, so only I can go with you." "Then let's ourselves go ashore and have a toast to a fine free voyage. Whiskabaw for me, and that same grand wine for you." They sat in a dusty shop whose walls were lined with bottles of all shapes and volumes, little pudgy flasks to giant demijohns. After a time they sang together, beating out the measures with their hands and smiling foolishly at each other. But at length the warm wine of Oporto filled the boy with a pleasant sadness. He felt that there were tears coming to his eyes, and he was rather glad of it. He would show Tim that he had his sorrows, that he was not just a featherhead boy with a craving to go to the Indies. He would reveal his depths. "Do you know, Tim," he said, "there was a girl I came away from, and she was named Elizabeth. Her hair was gold, gold like the morning, and on the night before I came away I called to her, and she came to me in the dark. The dark was all about us like a tent and cold. She cried and cried for me to stay, even when I told her of the fine things and the trinkets and the silks I would bring back to her in a little time. She would not be comforted at all, and it's a sad thing on me to be thinking of her crying there for my leaving." The full tears came into his eyes. "I know," said Tim softly. "I know it's a sad thing to be a man, to be leaving a girl and running off to sea. Haven't I left hundreds of them? And all beautiful? But here's another cup to you, boy. Wine is better to a woman than all the sweet pastes of France, and a man drinking it. Wine makes every woman lovely. Ah, if the homely ones would only put out a little font of wine in the doors of their houses, like the holy water to a church, there would be more marriage in the towns. A man would never know the lack they had for looks. But have another cup of the grand wine, sad boy, and it may be a princess, and you leaving her behind you. End of Chapter 2, Section 1.